We've got Michael here, who's going to be hacking deterministic Bitcoin addresses. So, if I get you all to give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you. Okay, so I just want to preface a couple of things. First of all, this talk is only about Bitcoin. I'm not going to be talking about all the other wonderful cryptocurrencies that are out there. I'm only talking about Bitcoin. Who has some Bitcoin? Oh my God, you just told everyone you have Bitcoin. Good on you. Okay. Also, I want to let you know that I won't, one of the enduring mysteries about Bitcoin has been the secret identity of Satoshi Nakamoto. And I just want to tell you, I'm not going to be speculating or talking about Satoshi Nakamoto at all, and I certainly won't be speculating about the most likely candidate in terms of who that may be. The other thing I want to tell you is that I'm not a lawyer. Just because something is technically possible doesn't mean it isn't stealing, even in a decentralized world. Just be aware of that. If you do happen to, using any of the methods I'm about to show you, come across some Bitcoin, don't call me, I'm not a lawyer. So where did this begin for me? Well, I stumbled across a spreadsheet, and it's a Google spreadsheet that someone has kindly shared. Please work. Okay, good. So I just stumbled across this. Some person created this, and they maintain this Google spreadsheet. It's a public link. It's available, and it's a spreadsheet that contains a list of Bitcoin addresses that have at least a balance of at least 25 Bitcoin or more, and it's sorted conveniently with value descending, which is handy. And we can see that there's an address here that contains 79,957 Bitcoins, which by today's value is about $680 million, give or take. Never been spent, and it's just sitting there. So, my mind's ticking away, and I'm thinking, right, there's all this money there, right? It's just waiting, clearly, right? And so, one of the other motivations I had for this research is I actually genuinely tried to buy some Bitcoin back in about 2013. I used this exchange called IGOP. I did all the due diligence, igop.com.au, yeah, they're Australian. It's an Australian company, 13th Pty Ltd. Yep, good, that checks out, right, good, yep. $5,000, $690, 23 cents per Bitcoin. Thank you very much, I get 8.792 Bitcoin. I never got the Bitcoin. So, the exchanges are dodgy as, I don't trust them at all, so, why not try and fund Bitcoin some other way? The other thing is I have an 11-year-old at home, has a serious funding issue around the V-Bucks for some game called Fortnite, so, I've got to fund that as well. So let's do a bit of a quick Bitcoin address 101. What does an address actually look like in the Bitcoin world? Well, there's three different types of addresses, and they start with either a 1, a 3, or a BC1. Now, I'm not going to talk about these other two on the bottom, the 3 and the BC1. They're a slightly different type of address, page to script hash address, and the BC1 is related to a thing called segregated witness. I don't have any time to go into any of that, so I'm only covering off this top type of address, the one starting with the 1. So the thing when I first started looking at Bitcoin is addresses are generated offline. I don't know whether it's my software development background. I just sort of, when I first looked at Bitcoin, I thought, surely you have to register an address. So it's like opening a bank account. Surely you have to fire up the Bitcoin client, and there's some kind of, you create the wallet, there's a registration, and the thing gets somehow registered on the network. Well, it doesn't work like that at all. It's completely cryptographic in nature. You can do all of this offline. So you can just generate as many Bitcoin addresses as you like. You don't have to use them. They may never get used. They're only going to be, you only need to use them if someone actually sends Bitcoin to that address. So the address is just simply something you give to someone else, and it can be cryptographically proven later on that you've got the private key because you generated it. Hopefully you haven't lost the private key because then you're screwed. And then you get to spend your Bitcoin. So what I want to do for you now is just quickly unpack from a Bitcoin address going right back to what is the mechanism that's actually securing the Bitcoin on the blockchain here. What is it that separates anyone in this room from that, $680 million in that particular address, right? So when we take the Bitcoin address, we unpack it with base 58, which is a particular type of encoding that they've created, and you get this hexadecimal string. Now, that actually consists of two parts. The green bit on the left is what's called a hash 160. I'm going to explain that in a second. That's the actual address. And on the right-hand side, the purple bit is a checksum that's added on. So basically, this has been engineered in a way that this address is something you could, tell your friend over the phone. You could read out the address, and they could, it's not convenient, obviously. But they've done some nice stuff like they make sure that the characters 0, O, I, capital I, and L are not included in that, so you can't sort of screw up, mix the characters. So it's sort of, it's been designed to be a human transferable kind of address mechanism, if you like. But the real thing here is that hash 160 value is the actual thing, so we can peel away all that other stuff. We don't need to worry too much about it. The hash 160 is what it is. And if you've ever looked at blockchain.info, which is kind of a leading website where you can pull apart the blockchain, look through all the different transactions and addresses, and you'll see this hash 160 is listed there. If you've ever wondered what that is, then now you know. So let's now sort of go back from the hash 160 back to what's the private key, or what's the secret that's actually protecting the Bitcoin. So we've got the Bitcoin address over on the left here, which is the hash 160. So what this is literally a ripe MD160 of a SHA-256 of a public key. And in this case, you can see the public key in the box in the middle, and that's actually from an elliptic curve function. And so there's a secret that goes into an elliptic curve function, and what comes out is a public key, SHA-256 of that, and a ripe MD160 of that, and you get this hash 160. And so when someone sends you Bitcoin and you give them the address, all you have to do is give the hash 160. You don't have to reveal the actual public key that you use to get the hash 160. So there's kind of interesting things that go on here. I'm going to attempt, Peter Quickland's not here, is he? I'm going to try and attempt to explain elliptic curve cryptography in 60 seconds. Essentially, you've got a graph with some x and y points that are plotted on it with a particular formula. In the case of Bitcoin, the type or the specification of the elliptic curve that's used is known as SECP256K1, which is documented in full by the Standards for Efficient Cryptography group. This standard outlines a couple, or specification I should say, outlines a couple of things: the formula that's used for the elliptic curve, the line, and then what's known as G, or the base point. What this is essentially, it's a starting point somewhere on that line, but it's static. It's part of the specification. It says you always start here. And then there's this value called N. N is the thing we want to look at. N is what's used to iterate a certain number of times, or N times, from G, from the base point. So what happens is there's and I don't know, I'm not a mathematician, so I don't understand what I'm about to tell you, but basically there is a calculation that occurs starting from G. It's point addition and point multiplication a certain number of times. Turns out it's N number of times in here. And then it occurs N times, and the N, so the number of times that you've gone from base point to a finishing point, is your private key. And where you finish, the ending point is actually the public key. And it's supposedly hard to work backwards from that. So if I give you the public key, you don't know how many times to get back to G. It's not possible to work out, apparently. So focusing on N, you can see here it's a 32, it's all in there in hex, but it's a 32 byte representation, and it starts with a lot of Fs. Now, so it's 256 bits. So if all 256 bits were set, you'd expect all of those to be Fs, right? So what you can basically do is your private key can be anything from 0 or 1 right up to 256 bits to almost all the F set, but the specification doesn't quite let you go right to the end. It sort of chops off at the end, where you see it goes FFFE, BAA, ED, etc. So all we've got to do is pick a number between 1 and this. And this is like the world's greatest lottery, and I can play this offline, right? The tickets are free, and there's buckets of money everywhere, and it's only a 78-digit long number, right? And according to Wolfram Alpha, the name for this number is 115 quadrillion. Didn't know there was such a thing. Okay, so it's just 256 bits. So the only thing protecting anyone's Bitcoin is 256 bits of random data. Sounds easy to me. And of course, if you know cryptography, that's pretty awesomely secure. But you know, mathematicians, they say this is impossible. You can't crack this. It's not going to do it because this key space is like picking up a grain of sand somewhere and, you know, and putting it down somewhere. You have to find that grain of sand again, right? You know, on the entire planet, like times the entire universe. And it's like this number is huge, right? You're not going to do it. But, you know, we're hackers. Impossible. Can't use the word impossible. It's improbable, right? It's improbable. Like, okay, realistically, it's not going to happen. But it can't stop us from trying. So we're going to accept the challenge. And of course, someone has done this. They've accepted the challenge. It's called the Large Bitcoin Collider. So you can download this client. You can participate in the network. I've run a machine on it for a while. I've got nothing, but you know, these guys, they actually say their challenge accepted. Let's crack this key space. Let's see if we can find some Bitcoin using this method, brute force it. And they have a trophy page, and they've actually done it, right? Multiple times. The last was on the 15th of November. You can see there, 0.54 of Bitcoin. So it's about probably $4.5 in today's value, Australian. And the coolest part is like, you know, like the SETI project and things like that. So it's a bit like this kind of thing, right? Mersenne Primes, God, I had machines on that for years. Never got anything for it. This is way cooler because if your machine actually finds the private key, you get to spend first. Like, you get to do what you want to do. And they provide a bit of advice on there, which is really cool about, you know, depending on your jurisdiction, it may or may not be legal, etc., etc. But it's technically possible. So, other than brute forcing the key space, what else? What else can we do? Must be something here, right? One, dictionary attacks. Okay, well, introducing brain wallets. The most idiotic idea anyone ever came up with. Why remember 256 bits of key stuff when you can just remember a password? What could possibly go wrong? Well, let's have a look how this works. You take a SHA-256 of the word password, and it gives you this beautiful 256-bit output. That looks perfect for a private key. Let's just use that as a private key. What more do we need to do? And you get a Bitcoin address. How many times do you think someone has used this Bitcoin address? 45,010 times. Now, admittedly, the total received through this address has only been $2,500 almost. So it's not, you know, you're not gonna retire off this, right? But it's a starting point. And that's all I needed. So, time to build. So I started to look at how can I build a death ray, something that's just going to, you know, crank this up, right? Now, the rest of my research might be a little bit lackluster for you, but what I'm hoping is you take this and you run with it, and then give me some Bitcoin if you get it. Right. So this is how it works. I've got a Bitcoin server running at home, which keeps a full copy of the blockchain. I run a thing called Rusty Block Parser, which is a Rust-built blockchain parser thing that just basically just reads all these binary DAT files and spits out a whole bunch of CSV files. And then I just do a sort, you know, very basic stuff, just looking at all of the those addresses that start with a 1 that have ever been used on the blockchain, give me one massive list and sort them. I've got up to Monday this week, 340 million of them in a list. And then on the other side, the right-hand side, take some password lists, look at some other stuff, generate some addresses deterministically using, you know, sorts of different input, and then just do a matchup. Profit, right? Let's see what we find. So let's start off with some password lists. So get a big password dump list. So there was one last year, you know, they're everywhere, right? But there was one in particular, it was just the first one I found on my hard drive, and it was called anti-public. It was some big breach that happened or whatever. 193 million passwords in a list. So I ran that over. I basically generated 193 million Bitcoin addresses, compared it against any address that had been used, and the result, 12,421. So good, promising results. It turns out though that a lot of it's junk. About 92% of it is junk. And it was an experiment that someone seemed to have done in about mid-2013 with just all these dictionary words, and they all have the same Bitcoin amount. It's like 5,460 Satoshis. Very, very small amount of money. And not only that, it was transferred into these addresses that use these dictionary words, but it was within a second or almost instantly later, it was taken straight back out again. So there's nothing there. Then there's 1,018 other ones. So I'll give you a highlight of a couple of these. Again, all of these have been drained, right? And this started to lead me to believe that other people have already been doing this. This is happening for a long time, right? This is not new, which was a little bit disappointing. But anyway. KKK, lots of Ks, you get weird stuff like that. Dead Sheep has, over its lifetime, had 14.2 or 3 Bitcoin go through it. And there's another one, ASDFGA. Does anyone know what that is?
Second row.
Yes, you just run your finger from the A to the L, go up to the O and back to the Q on your keyboard. And that had 18.2. Let me click on one of these and I'll show you. So let's jump over to blockchain.info. And you can see here, last time this was in 2014, and you get an idea of what had happened here, right? So 18.2 Bitcoin went in on the 13th of February at 16:43 and 2 seconds, and 2 seconds later it came out. Who do you think did that? And it's possible that it was a legitimate person who didn't know any better, come up with that great keyboard pattern password, brain wallet for the win, and someone's come along and they've already got they've got a better version of my death rate clearly. Well, they were years ahead of me anyway. So then I thought, what about numbers, right? So we've got things like pins, passcodes. What if I just make like a generator that's just going to count upwards and see how we go there? And I've got, please work. Hang on, let me just break out. Demo time. So I put on, sorry, okay. That's better? Okay. So on GitHub, if you search for BTC Thumper, you will be able to look at the first couple of dozen lines of Rust code I've ever written in my life. Go easy. What I've basically done here is I go, okay, just pick a number, 5,000, let's count up to 6,000, and this thing just generates Bitcoin addresses. It's just in a comma delimited format. Got the Bitcoin address on the left, and on the right I've got sort of a reference, M1. I have a whole sort of different versions of this, sharing, password lists, etc. But this sort of format, and then sort of using this in my processing to do the comparison work. And of course, that Bitcoin address. So if we look at one of these, that Bitcoin address there can be regenerated. The private key is simply a SHA-256 of that number. That's it. So did some. So that's the process for doing numbers. So I just did pretty modest amount, just 15 million of those. I could have done more, but my machines at home aren't particularly quick. I was doing word lists and other stuff at the time, but I found 37, which I thought was interesting. So there are the numbers. It's interesting, there's a few numbers you might recognise. Nothing substantial in terms of results here. So looking at, even the BTC amount corresponds with the private key. What about 3111337? Oh, well, that's pretty high. And then you get ones like this. So that's had a decent 6.5 through it. And again, looking at this, it went in at 16:31:45 seconds, and 2 seconds later it came out. What's going on here? I'm pretty sure it's another death rate.
Do you reckon they're humble?
Sorry?
Do you reckon they would be Bitcoin humble?
That's a possibility also, yeah. But it's straight through, yeah. A transaction like that where it's not, so tumbling typically see multi-party transactions. A whole bunch of parties here, another whole bunch of parties there, and it goes through, and you can't sort of untangle it. So yeah, not sure what's going on there. Birth dates, I thought this has got to be a winner for sure, right? So what if I generate some birth dates from, and like actually use them as like strings, right? So someone's like a brain wallet password using a birth date. So I've tried 4 different formats, and I've gone from the 1st to the 1st 1900 right up to 2020. It's not a birth date yet, but anyway. Results, 70,400 addresses I generated, found 3. All right, let's see who the lucky birthday people are. 28th of August 1967, 0.005 Bitcoin, and that had been drained again. What's that one there? 2nd of January 1980, or maybe the other way around if it's US. And then 20th of May 1981. Let's look at this one. So let's have a look. So it went in, 0.1, it came out, a little bit of a transaction fees probably come off there. But again, 1 second later, so clearly this sort of activity happening. Epoch, I thought, come on, IoT. Surely some dev has decided to timestamp transactions or do something like this. What if I generate some epoch timestamps? You know, take that sort of number that would equate to you know, a timestamp, give a date range. So I went through 9 million of these. I found nothing. All right. What else? So in November last year, there was an anonymous pastebin post from someone who was revealing an interesting story about 9 Bitcoin that had been, he sort of stumbled across using this type of method. And he was proposing all sorts of other things he'd done in his experiments, taking even the block hashes from the blocks and using them as inputs for private keys. So I looked at that, and this hash here is anyone recognise this hash? You know, get extra points if you get no. Okay, so this is a hash from the Genesis block, the first block in the Bitcoin blockchain. So I went through, just took the hashes as they are, turned them into private keys, ran it through. I did 500,000 of them. The block height now up to about 517, 18,000, so I'm a bit short. But method one, just took it as a string and did like as a brain wallet password, nothing. Binary, nothing. And then double SHA-256, because this is quite popular as well, still nothing. So a little bit lackluster there. I think this could be expanded in a lot of other areas. You know, hopefully you sort of see the possibility of this. I think that if you look, we looked at different encodings. Like maybe you could do, maybe if you were taking like a SHA-512 and like cutting off the left hand or the right hand side, or something like that. Maybe people are doing that. There are examples where someone has there's an address that was created. Someone had actually done the SHA-256 of the word password, but they've done it 1,975 times. And that actually was an address that had been used on the blockchain. So, you know, maybe there's an iteration thing as well that some people have done. Previous transaction IDs, there was that pastebin one that I was talking about, that guy's talking about, he's seen examples of maybe nefarious parties sort of chaining transactions together, maybe trying to move it through in a predictable way, and they're using deterministic addresses so they don't sort of have to rely on storing random keys and potentially losing them. So using sort of a guessable way of doing it. You know, there's also the possibility of looking at opportunities where developers make mistakes. You know, here's a classic example. And this particular address has had $465,000 go through it. And it is literally the result of SHA-256ing nothing. So just the base, whatever SHA-256 gives you to start with, and using that as a private key. So, you know, maybe this was a software error, maybe someone's done something and, you know, it's a null value that's come through in the key generation process, and then an address spits out in the end. Other weaknesses, public key collision. So this is moving away from the deterministic stuff just for a second. Because we take a SHA-256 of the public key, and we do a write MD160 of it, we're going from 256 bits of stuff into 106 down to 160 bits of stuff. It's possible that there are multiple private keys, or sorry, public keys, that when they're hashed, may result in the same hash 160. So, you know, I think it's infeasible today, but who knows what the future will hold. Great tweet popped up in January, thanks to Eldar for passing this one along to me. I burned at least 4 or 5 nights on this one. Is some static, interesting use of some static variables in Java, around Java util random. Taking a static value, multiplying it with, I think, system nanotime or something like this. So I did a whole bunch of testing and trying to see if I could replicate like nanotime, depending on how long someone had their machine powered on, multiplied by the static to see if I could find a key that may have been generated previously. Haven't really even touched the surface on that one, but I think there's possibilities there. There is a thing around ECDSA that so when you spend Bitcoin, there's a random value that's used, in the elliptic curve digital signature process. And if it turns out if you spend Bitcoin from the same address more than once, and you happen to use the same random nonce in the signature algorithm, I can get you a private key like that, right? So really, I mean, the purists will say you should never use a Bitcoin address more than once, like to spend. You can receive as many times as you like, but as soon as you spend from it, you really shouldn't, unless you can be absolutely certain that the random nonce in the signature process is always different every time. And there's a good story of a guy who talks about that as well. Let me just check out again the time. Actually, I've got a quick time here just to show you what that looks like. He talks about locating a number of these transactions and then the actual calculation used as well. So definitely something there. So what are the takeaways here? Well, I think the problem applies to all the other cryptocurrencies. So I said at the beginning, this is only about Bitcoin, right? But let's look at something like Dogecoin. Who has Dogecoin? Bitcoin, you shouldn't be telling me you've got. Dogecoin, you can tell me you've got Dogecoin. Who's got Dogecoin? No, okay, good. Okay. So Doge is totally non-serious. Well, was. What's the value now? I don't know, but it's totally non-serious when it started out. So I think it is entirely possible. There are a whole bunch of Dogecoin wallets out there and addresses that were generated using, brain wallets or this method, right? I haven't even touched Dogecoin. If you don't know how Dogecoin was created, it was literally a fork of Bitcoin, and I think maybe a dozen lines of code have been changed. The addresses start with a DD. Is it DD? What they start with? Yeah. But it's the same method, right? So all of this could apply to that. Could apply maybe to the other forks and other cryptocurrencies. The other takeaway thing here is that clearly managing keys is hard, right? Grandma still doesn't use PGP because it's too hard. When's Grandma going to have Bitcoin, right? Then we've got hardware wallets, we've got things we can look at there. So which path do you take? You go to the black hat path, and you build the killer death ray, and you build a massive rainbow-like table. And I reckon this is really possible. You just invest heaps and heaps and heaps, and maybe some miners get pissed off with trying to mine, and they just turn all that computing power to building a massive cracking rainbow-like table with all of the different, oh God, Goodman is here, and build a massive rainbow table, and then just crack away. What you can actually do is sit on the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network or other cryptocurrency of your choice, wait for the transactions and do what these other people are doing. You just got to do it quicker. Or you go the white hat method. Maybe we end up with something like, have my Bitcoin been pwned or something like that? I don't know. Something that's going to tell people about these lame addresses, right? Bridging the gap between what's technically possible and what we know humans are going to do to cryptography when it's implemented, all right? There's a big gap between them. Edge cases, sometimes you'll find things like this when you're looking to crazy stuff that's happened in Bitcoin. The hash 160 value. The thing here is that maybe the hash one, you can just generate a hash 160, you can just generate something, do the checksum on the end of it, encode it as a Bitcoin address, and for all intents and purposes, it's a Bitcoin address. But the hash 160 may not actually have a private or public key behind it, right? And this is a classic example. There is this address on the blockchain. It currently today has a balance of $503,000 worth of Bitcoin, waiting for the taking. All you've got to do is find a private key whose SHA-256 and hash 160 is all zeros, right? If you can do that, you can spend this Bitcoin. But until someone can do that and prove they've got a private key that can do that, it ain't going anywhere. Questions? You've already got this.
Do you have enough Bitcoin to retire?
I have a day job.
Sorry, questions?
Slide 37.
These are by number.
Oh. Yes, Jeff is here. Yes. No, there is a private key because you take a SHA-256 of nothing, right? So if you don't give the SHA-256 function, the hashing function, if you don't give it any output, it'll still give you a result. It's the first SHA-256 hash that exists. Does that make sense? Yeah, as the private key.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know how to determine if it's the same person or not, and yeah, no, and this is the thing. It's like seriously, this is such a tangled mess. The blockchain. It's just like I've tried to read articles on I've seen people have run workshops on money laundering, like analysis and these sorts of things, and I've tried to do that. I don't know how people do that. It's hard. It's really hard.
We've got a question at the back. Try turning it off and on.
Hey, so you did it with single dictionary words. I was wondering if you've looked into sort of the 12-word recovery process at all.
No, I haven't done that, and it's a whole other thing I'd like to dig into at some point. I'm interested in how hardware wallets work, because hardware wallets use a deterministic process, which is based off that initial 12 words, an initial bit of entry, initial private key, and then they use another process, which is far more complicated, which then basically creates another private key based off the first one, and it keeps going in like a huge long chain. So all you need to recover is that top one, and you can get all the ones that were created underneath it. Yeah, I haven't tried that. I did look, a few of those word lists are on GitHub and stuff, and there's a list of 10,000 or something. But yeah, I haven't quite worked out how to do that. I think it's going to be a pretty massive key space as well.
Cool, thanks.
Any other questions? Any other hands? No. All right.
I'm Big Mac on Twitter. Bring me Bitcoin.